No sense of morality, no thought given to the consequences of your action. That's what makes us different.
What's up, lore masters? Today we'll be discussing two different people. One person that decided to take a stand against a government that closely resembled 1940s Japan as they took advantage of the resources of a home that had not originally belonged to them and were killing and pilfering resources from that world, and the other, well, they did the same thing. Let's just get into it.
So you were wounded during an attack I carried out when I was part of the resistance. And I'm supposed to feel guilty.
I'll have to admit, I was really surprised by a recent meme I shared, which was in good fun, but people always take those things wrong. Ultimately, it was comparing Eddington to Kira, with a not insubstantial amount of people saying that the comparison was completely different, that Eddington was worse and unjustified. Okay, let's take a look at that. First, let's compare the lives and story arcs of both Kira and Eddington. Kira Nerys grew up in a life of turmoil and pain. All she basically ever knew was an unforgiving world where the oppressive Cardassian regime had completely enslaved her homeland and subjugated her people. She killed military personnel along with civilians, and she admits as such.
I wasn't part of your war. I was an innocent. I wasn't even in the military. Do you know what I did on Bajor? I was a servant. Do you remember what you did? How you put a plasma charge outside his bedroom window in the middle of the night?
I remember. None of us liked killing. We were fighting for our freedom against...
You vaporized the entire East Wing! 12 Cardassians were killed, including Gul Pirak's entire family. 23 others were crippled. Don't you feel guilty? Don't you feel ashamed of what you did?
None of you belonged on Bajor. It wasn't your world.
However, it is amazing to me that she gets a pass while Eddington does not. Let's examine some of the reasons that have been given for her being a terrorist. She was born on a planet under occupation. This is definitely a good reason to rebel against a hostile force that has occupied you, but the problem is, it's not a really good counter to why Eddington can't be a freedom fighter. The Maquis colonies were also under extreme hardship and, arguably, only a rung or two above what was occurring to Bajor. And if Starfleet continued its capitulation, then they were going to ultimately be in the same straits, so I'm not convinced here. It has been stated that the Federation colonists could move. Arguably, Bajorans in general, and Kira specifically, could not. Firstly, I think it's laughable that many who would say that the colonists should just move would also fight against that same counter in Gaza right now, but let's not get into actual politics. A hypothetical is probably better. It would be the same as if the United States and Russia had came down to blows, and the US ceded the Philippines and Alaska to Mother Russia, telling the people there that they had to move. Also, not for nothing, while it is harder for Bajorans to leave, they did have options of attempting to escape, or actually leave, as we see multiple Bajorans did escape Bajor during the occupation. It's honestly pretty heartless to just say that the colonists should leave their homes that they made because a piece of paper was signed. Lastly, Eddington went too far, and Kira Nerys would never have done anything like this. This is also just patently wrong. It's false. Kira Nerys killed civilians, Bajorans and Cardassians alike.
You feel during the occupation? I didn't want to attack any facility that had a Bajoran working in it, but I did it because they were collaborators. They were working with the enemy.
She called the Bajorans collaborators and basically othered them. And after making her fellow brethren to be something they're not, making them non-Bajoran, she unalived them. And I have a hard time believing that freedom-fighting Nerys would never have used anything at her disposal available to win. Would she have used weapons of mass destruction on Bajor? Nah, probably not, but she probably would have done it on a moon or a Cardassian planet. So what about Eddington? Well, let's address some of those criticisms.
Captain.
Mr. Eddington, I have just one question. Why?
Will knowing my personal motivation change anything at this point?
No, I don't suppose it will.
Then let's table that for now.
One of the first is that Eddington is basically just a rich kid that is daylighting as a freedom fighter. Yeah, I mean, technically so was Bin Laden, and he did a lot of damage. And really a lot of the founding fathers of the United States, but again, I said I'm not going to get political. The fact is, he came from the Federation and decided to fight against what he thought was a tyrannical government. Oh, and the Cardassians. That doesn't mean that his fight is unjust. Likewise, Sisko seems to think that it's because Eddington couldn't be in command in Starfleet. That's why he became a part of the Maquis. That may or may not be the case, but let me ask you this. You think the men and women starving and being brutalized by the Cardassians really care about those motivations?
Those people, they were colonists on Salva II. They had farms and shops and homes and schools. And then one day, the Federation signed a treaty and handed their world over to the Cardassians. Just like that. They made these people refugees overnight.
Do you think the children that won't go to sleep hungry or be dragged off by a Cardassian caretaker really give two fucks about where he came from or what he used to do? I personally don't. But if not that, then, well, he did betray his uniform. Again, a lot of people put stock in this, but let's all be clear. The Federation was wrong and was even forcing Starfleet to do things that they thought were morally dubious. Not to mention that when you really look at Starfleet, it has a pretty sketchy record as well. Things off the top of my head include giving weapons to both sides, causing a civil war for a civilization, creating a cloaking device in direct violation of a Romulan treaty, starting mass chaos on Earth to gain a military dictatorship, and creating a virus that would wipe out an entire species, and then deciding not to give a cure. And these are only a few. There were many more failures. So yeah, Starfleet, sometimes they get it wrong, and sometimes it's worth fighting them. I personally think there is justification for deciding to fight against Starfleet to assist the Maquis colonies, or even preventing them from helping the Cardassians during the Klingon-Cardassian War in some ways. But that's probably a conversation for another time. And finally, he bombed planets with a gas that would kill all Cardassians. So, firstly, this was done in a way that all Cardassians could get off the planet safely, though that is unlikely and most certainly ended in death for some of the Cardassians there. But secondly, Sisko does it too, and Starfleet Command basically just gives their blessing after the fact. And it's ridiculous how many people ignore that. But thirdly, and most importantly, yeah, this was horrific. And it's absolutely what a terrorist or freedom fighter or whatever I'm supposed to call them would do. And I think it's something Nerys would have done. I have no doubt about that, honestly. So is it bad, and does he deserve some form of prison time? Yeah, definitively. Does it make him worse than Nerys? I don't think so. All of that said, I do admit that it does feel different when Eddington fights against the Cardassians versus when Kira does it, but no one has been able to articulate why, and even I wasn't able to till just recently. The problem I see is actually fourfold. Eddington was attacking a government that wasn't necessarily allied with the Cardassians, but providing humanitarian aid. He was putting the security of the Alpha and Beta Quadrants in possible danger with his actions. The attacks we see had no direct impact on the actual Maquis colonies, and he, ironically, may have been attacking a government that would have granted the Maquis their freedom. Starfleet, at the officer level, and likely the leadership hierarchy, had no great love for the Cardassians. However, Federation policy was one of pacifism and appeasement, even at this point. This is obvious by the amount of defections we see from Starfleet officers to assist the Maquis. The reason Starfleet was even responding was due to the humanitarian assistance, as the Klingons were absolutely devastating the infrastructure of the Cardassians. Everything we see is Starfleet assisting so people don't starve. Cardassia was so weakened that they had civilians that couldn't feed themselves. In a society that has replicators. Think about that for a minute. That aside, when you think about it, with Kira Nerys and the Bajorans, they really just wanted the Cardassians gone from their space. Would they have launched an all-out war if they had gained independence and had the means? Maybe, I could certainly see that, but most all of the evidence shows they simply wanted to be left alone. This wasn't the case for the Maquis. Even though the Maquis were winning, or arguably had won, they still wanted more. Remember, at this time, the Cardassians and Klingons were at war. When Starfleet refused to join the war effort, the Klingons pulled out of the Khitomer Accords and were actively attacking Starfleet vessels. This was beginning to drain Starfleet resources as they tried to defend against Klingon attacks and provide the aid that was needed. Do I think the Maquis should have backed off and not increased pressure? I can't say that I really think they should have backed off, but it does change the calculus on the events and why I'm probably going to be harsher on the Maquis because of it. This isn't even to begin to discuss the tactics that the Maquis used. What we see initially with Eddington is theft of a Vulcan freighter at a Bajoran outpost protecting protected by the Federation. That's at least 3 governments that are being pulled into a major incident to stop industrial replicators from getting to Cardassia. Industrial replicators that were going to be primarily used to help house and rebuild Cardassia. These were not being used for the continued subjugation of the abandoned Federation colonies. Is attacking the infrastructure of a hostile government effective in bringing about change? Absolutely. Is doing it in this way a good idea? Absolutely not. And this is obvious when we see the Federation going balls to the wall to stop Eddington and his merry men of misanthropes after it. And all of this isn't even the largest reason, the largest issue. The more research I do, and I'll admit I did this research halfway through this specific script, but the largest issue is, in my opinion, that the Maquis may have been attacking a government that, at this point, was wholly changed. I think most people forget that the Cardassian government had a regime change that resulted in the Datapa Council gaining control, a civilian government. If you've ever watched the channel, you know that I have discussed how the military had complete control of Cardassia and likely was oppressing its very own people. We see the forming of a rebellion for a quote-unquote better Cardassia in previous seasons. This government was one that was actually created by the people, for the people. One that may have actually granted full-on independence to the Federation colonists, or at least were willing to negotiate better terms. Quark's quote that I used a while back rings very true here. The Cardassians were on the defensive, had no way of defending themselves against the Klingons, and it was a brand new government. If the Maquis had come to the negotiating table, maybe something could have been changed. Now let's be honest, the reason why Eddington is hated is because Sisko was written to hate him, showing massive flaws in Sisko's character and proving that he should probably be in prison for, if you'll excuse the wording here, crimes against humanity. But these aren't the reasons we should dislike Eddington. We should dislike or hate him for being short-sighted. He was not being a great hero fighting the evil Cardassians. He was being a faux hero, really, playing at terrorism. And he should be judged by that. He didn't consider the entire board. I think if he had thought it through and tried, the Maquis would still exist, even into Picard. But these are my opinions. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.